Thank you. It's amazing to be here. I want to thank, don't laugh, Andy. I want to thank the school, first of all, everyone's been incredibly welcoming. I want to thank the faculty who've really worked hard to make me feel welcome. The staff, especially Doris, who's been already indispensable, and Kurt, who is round the clock available via email, I've discovered, which is amazing. And I very much want to thank John, who has made this transition much easier, I think, than it would have been. And the transition will continue through this semester. I'd like to, in turn, introduce John as the director of the school this semester. So he'll be working very much with me this semester through this transition. And I'd also like to introduce him as the new Harry K. and Albert K. Smith Professor in Architecture. So thank you again, John. Podium. So I've known for a long time by now, decades I'd say even, which is a little scary to actually be able to speak in terms of decades, but I've known for a long time that Rice has an extraordinarily strong design culture. A little less than a year ago, I was asked if I'd like to consider playing a role in that culture, and it didn't take much for me to say yes. This is a place where ideas about architecture in the city are hypothesized, formed, and tested. Its unique size permits the school to coalesce, but also enables individual research by faculty and students alike. The RSA is large enough to have a center of gravity, and small enough to be able to declare which sun it wants to revolve around. That's a pretty unique position. For a number of years, Rice has used Houston as its petri dish, with plenty of productive output. No doubt the school will continue a productive history of research on the metropolis as it encounters conditions unimaginable to preceding generations. At the same time, our discipline has, in many senses, left architecture itself untended. This is not a Rice issue. It's actually an architecture issue. At school after school, in project after project, in conference after conference, it's remarkable, and when I say that I mean it's bad, how infrequently architects talk about architecture today. The RSA is extraordinarily well positioned not only to help renew this conversation, but in fact to lead it into new territory. And I'll do everything I can to cultivate this discussion within these rooms. Furthermore, it's a conversation that once started will be impossible to contain. For unlike Las Vegas, what happens at Rice doesn't stay at Rice, or it won't. I'm convinced that we're perched at the front edge of a new architectural era. It's hard not to be nostalgic for the radicality of the late 60s, 70s, and 80s, and those working during that period were mindful of the radicality of the teens, 20s, and 30s. Juxtaposition, collage, rotation, dissection, assemblage, and other strategies were the something borrowed, something new for the second generation or neo-avant-garde of the late 20th century. But looking backwards will only go so far. Look, I read lots of books. I read lots of books about lots of things that have happened in the past. I'm a firm believer in the ideas that come from those books and from those pasts. I am a historian, I am a theorist, but I'm also an architect. Architecture has a unique relationship to history, to theory, and to intellectual culture. We're opportunists of the best and sometimes the most roughshod sort. We read, we think, we design, we instrumentalize, which is a term that's not used very often in other parts of the university in such a positive way. I think it's a good thing. We instrumentalize in ways that no other field does. No doubt we are fortunate to have inherited the ideologies of the avant-garde and its neo-avant-garde progeny, but we don't need to treat those legacies with kid gloves. We stand face to face with this historical pattern. Why not see our own moment with the same exhilarating potential that we so fetishize in other periods? Why not contour tomorrow's landscape? A little hubris never hurt anybody. As an architect, a teacher, and now as dean, which I still have a little trouble saying, but I'm going to try and get used to it, the strands of my work are glued together by an interest in and an optimism about the collective public subject. What I mean by collective public subject is our audience, the bodies, brains, and institutions that move through our spaces, our cities, and our ideas. The contemporary subject is unlike any subject that has ever existed before. This alone warrants new modes of writing and theorizing about architecture. It warrants new attitudes toward design, new techniques of representation and communication. Most of all, we have to explore this newness not by dumbing architecture down, but by asserting a discourse that refuses to separate theory from practice. Advancing not only the RSA, but the field of architecture as a whole means returning to the question of architecture's political role within a more optimistic framework. Rather than seeing political efficacy as being limited to resistance and critique, architecture and urbanism ought to once again offer visions of possible worlds to come. These are the reasons that it was easy for me to say I wanted to come to Rice. Now that I'm here, they're ever more true. This semester will be filled with lectures, workshops, events, publications, thesis, a curriculum review, new hires, and of course, most importantly, the work that takes place every day in the school itself.